The sun was shining brightly as people hurried through the busy airport, their footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Suitcases rolled behind them, and announcements about flight delays crackled over the intercom. Among the crowd stood Maya Johnson, a confident young woman dressed in a sleek blazer and carrying a stylish leather tote bag. She had an important business meeting to attend in another city, and everything seemed to be going according to plan, until she reached the security checkpoint. Officer Greg Parker was having one of those days where nothing seemed to go right. His morning coffee had spilled all over his uniform, leaving a sticky brown stain that refused to come out no matter how hard he scrubbed. He skipped breakfast because he was running late, and now, surrounded by impatient travelers and noisy children, his patience was wearing thin. As he scanned the line of passengers waiting to pass through security, something about Maya caught his attention. Maya looked calm and collected, her posture straight, her eyes focused ahead. But to Greg, there was something about her demeanor that irritated him. Maybe it was the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, or the fact that she didn't seem fazed by the chaos around her. Whatever it was, it triggered something inside him, a mix of frustration and prejudice that he couldn't quite explain. When Maya stepped up to present her passport and boarding pass, Greg decided to make things difficult for her. "Hold on. A second," he said sharply, snatching the documents from her hand before she could even finish speaking. He glanced at her name and photo, then looked back at her face, narrowing his eyes as if trying to find some hidden flaw. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his tone more accusatory than curious. "Chicago," Maya replied politely, keeping her voice steady despite the tension building inside her. She'd been stopped like this before, questioned unnecessarily, treated differently because of the color of her skin, but she always tried to remain composed. Arguing rarely helped, instead it often made things worse. Greg wasn't satisfied with her answer. "And what do you do there?" he pressed, leaning closer as though trying to intimidate her. When Maya explained that she worked as a marketing consultant, he smirked, clearly unimpressed. "Marketing, huh? You sure you can afford this ticket?" he sneered, gesturing toward her designer bag and polished shoes. The comment stung, but Maya bit her tongue. She knew better than to react emotionally, especially when dealing with someone in authority. Instead, she took a deep breath and reminded herself that this wasn't personal. It was systemic. Still, the weight of his words lingered, chipping away at her confidence. As Greg continued to interrogate her, other passengers began to notice. Some shifted uncomfortably in line, avoiding eye contact, while others whispered among themselves. One elderly woman shook her head disapprovingly, muttering under her breath about how unfair the situation was. A teenage boy filming a vlog on his phone zoomed in on the scene, capturing every word and gesture. Greg, oblivious to the growing audience, became increasingly aggressive. He demanded to search Maya's bag, rifling through its contents without permission. Lipsticks, notebooks, chargers, all were pulled out and examined as though they might contain evidence of wrongdoing. When Maya asked why he was treating her differently from the other passengers, he shot back, "Because I can." His arrogance only fueled Maya's anger, though she kept it hidden beneath a mask of calmness. This wasn't the first time she'd faced racism, but it was one of the most blatant examples she'd encountered. Each insult, each invasive question felt like a slap across the face. Yet, she refused to let him see her breakdown. Instead, she thought quickly, weighing her options. Then it hit her, the perfect solution. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. As the call connected, she turned slightly away from Greg, lowering her voice so only she could hear the person on the other end. "Dad," she said softly, "I need your help." Greg overheard the word "Dad" and scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh, great," he muttered sarcastically. "What's Daddy gonna do? Send a lawyer? Write me a parking ticket?" He chuckled to himself, clearly amused by the idea that calling someone's father would solve anything. But Maya didn't respond. She simply listened to the voice on the phone, nodding occasionally as she spoke. Passengers nearby exchanged glances, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The atmosphere grew tense, charged with anticipation. Even Greg seemed to sense that something was off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on it. When Maya finally hung up, she turned back to face Greg with a newfound sense of resolve. Her earlier frustration had melted away, replaced by a quiet determination. "My dad will be here shortly," she announced, her voice calm but firm. For the first time since the confrontation began, Greg hesitated. Something in her tone made him uneasy, though he couldn't quite figure out why. Little did he know Maya's father wasn't just any ordinary man. He was Richard Johnson, the owner of Skyline Airlines, one of the largest and most prestigious airlines in the country. And when Richard got involved, things were about to change, for everyone. This sets the stage for the rest of the story, introducing the central conflict and characters while building suspense for what's to come. It also establishes Maya as a strong yet relatable protagonist, and hints at the power dynamics that will play a key role later. Greg's smirk quickly faded as the reality of Maya's words sank in. "Your dad?" he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. He glanced around at the growing crowd of onlookers, trying to regain control of the situation. "What's he gonna do, huh? Fly down here and lecture me?" Maya didn't respond. She simply stood there, her expression unreadable but radiating quiet confidence. Greg's frustration bubbled over into anger. "Listen," he snapped, jabbing a finger in her direction. "You're causing a scene here. Cooperate or things are going to get worse for you." But Maya wasn't intimidated anymore. She had spent years learning how to navigate situations like this, how to stay calm when others tried to provoke her. Instead of responding directly, she crossed her arms and waited. It wasn't long before two sharply dressed men appeared, walking briskly toward them. Their presence commanded attention. Passengers stepped aside instinctively as they approached. One of the men flashed a badge identifying himself as part of Skyline Airlines' executive security team. "Officer Parker?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. Greg turned to face him, his brow furrowed. "Yeah, that's me," he replied gruffly. "What's this about?" The man exchanged a glance with his colleague before speaking. "We'd like to speak with you privately if you don't mind." His words were measured, leaving no room for argument. Passengers craned their necks to catch a glimpse of what was happening, while whispers rippled through the crowd. Greg hesitated, suddenly unsure of himself. Until now, he had been the one in charge, the authority figure calling the shots. But these men exuded power, and their arrival signaled that something big was unfolding. Reluctantly, he followed them to a quieter corner near the security checkpoint, casting a suspicious glance back at Maya as he left. Once out of earshot, the representatives wasted no time getting to the point. "Do you know who Maya Johnson is?" one of them asked, his tone icy. Greg shook his head, still defensive. "Some woman who thinks she can play victim," he muttered under his breath. The second man leaned in closer, his voice dropping low. "That woman happens to be the daughter of Richard Johnson, the owner of Skyline Airlines. Does that name ring a bell?" Greg's eyes widened in shock. Of course, he knew who Richard Johnson was. Everyone in the aviation industry did. Richard was a self-made billionaire whose company dominated air travel across the country. His influence extended far beyond airlines, reaching into politics, media, and even law enforcement partnerships. To cross someone like Richard Johnson was career suicide. For a moment, Greg struggled to process what he was hearing. The pieces clicked together. The expensive bag, the polished appearance, the calm demeanor, and it hit him like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just some random traveler he could bully without consequences. This was personal and professional dynamite. Meanwhile, back at the security line, Maya watched the exchange unfold with a mix of satisfaction and sadness. She hated that moments like this still happened, that people judged her based on stereotypes rather than seeing her as an individual. Yet she also felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this incident would force Greg and others like him to rethink their biases. Maybe it would spark change. As news of the confrontation spread, so did the reactions from those around her. A middle-aged woman approached Maya, offering a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," she said softly. "It's disgusting how some people treat others because of the color of their skin." Maya nodded, appreciating the gesture. "Thank you," she replied. "It's not easy, but I try to focus on what I can control." Others weren't as kind. A few passengers whispered behind her back, questioning whether she was exaggerating the situation or using her father's wealth to gain special treatment. Maya ignored them. She was used to criticism. It came with the territory, but it still stung. She reminded herself that not everyone would understand her perspective, and that was okay. What mattered most was staying true to herself. Within minutes, social media erupted with posts about the incident. Someone had filmed part of Greg's interrogation and uploaded it online, tagging both Skyline Airlines and local police departments. The video quickly went viral, drawing thousands of comments. Some viewers expressed outrage at Greg's behavior, calling him a disgrace to law enforcement. Others defended him, claiming he was just doing his job and that Maya was overreacting. Back in the private discussion, Greg listened as the representatives outlined the potential fallout. "This isn't just about you anymore," one of them warned. "Skyline Airlines takes discrimination very seriously. If we decide to pursue action, it won't end well for you or your department." Greg felt a wave of panic wash over him. His career, his reputation, all of it hung by a thread. He opened his mouth to protest, to explain that he hadn't meant any harm, but the words caught in his throat. How could he justify his actions when the evidence was undeniable? When the meeting ended, Greg returned to the security area, his face pale and his shoulders slumped. Maya was still there, standing tall despite everything. As their eyes met, Greg opened his mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. Passengers continued to stream past, glancing curiously at the scene. Reporters began arriving, drawn by the viral video and the promise of a dramatic story. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and questions flew from every direction. Maya handled the attention with grace, answering reporters' questions, calmly and respectfully. She emphasized the importance of treating all travelers equally, regardless of race or background. By the time she boarded her flight, the airport buzzed with activity. Security personnel scrambled to contain the chaos, while Greg retreated to a nearby office, overwhelmed by guilt and fear. He replayed the events in his mind, each memory a fresh reminder of his mistakes. Had he really let his prejudices spiral so far out of control? And more importantly, could he ever make amends? For Maya, the experience was exhausting yet empowering. She hadn't planned to become the center of attention, but she realized that her platform could make a difference. With her father's support, she decided to use her story to advocate for systemic change, not just in airports but in society as a whole. As the plane took off, Maya gazed out the window, reflecting on everything that had happened. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to fight for justice, for herself and for countless others who faced similar struggles daily. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge her, inspire her, and ultimately transform her life forever. By the time Maya's flight touched down in Chicago, the story of her encounter with Officer Greg Parker had exploded across social media. Videos of the confrontation were everywhere, shared, commented on, and dissected by millions of people. Hashtags like #JusticeForMaya and racial profiling trended on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. News outlets picked up the story, turning what had started as a personal altercation into a national conversation about racism and accountability. Skyline Airlines acted swiftly. Within hours of the incident, they released an official statement condemning Greg's behavior and promising a thorough investigation. "Discrimination has no place in our society," the statement read. "We stand firmly against any form of prejudice and are committed to ensuring that all travelers are treated with dignity and respect." The airline also announced plans to review its partnership with local law enforcement agencies, vowing to implement stricter guidelines for how officers interact with passengers. Meanwhile, Greg's world was crumbling around him. Suspended pending investigation. He spent his days holed up in his apartment, glued to his phone as updates poured in. Every notification felt like another blow. A new article criticizing his actions, a viral tweet mocking him, or a comment calling for his dismissal. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, embarrassed to be associated with someone embroiled in such controversy. Even his family avoided discussing the situation, unsure of what to say. At the precinct, tensions ran high. Greg's superiors called an emergency meeting to address the fallout. Captain Lewis, a seasoned officer known for his no-nonsense approach, stood at the front of the room, arms crossed. "This is a mess," he said bluntly, glaring at Greg. "Not only did you embarrass yourself, but you've dragged this entire department into the spotlight. Do you have any idea what this means for us?" Greg shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unable to meet the captain's gaze. "I didn't mean for it to get this big," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "It was just, I thought she was suspicious." Captain Lewis slammed his fist on the table, startling everyone in the room. "Suspicious based on what? Her skin color, her clothes? That's not policing, that's profiling, and now we're paying the price." The lecture continued for what felt like hours, each word cutting deeper than the last. By the end of the meeting, Greg felt defeated. He had always prided himself on being tough, authoritative, and in control. But now, stripped of his badge and facing public scrutiny, he realized how fragile his authority truly was. Back in Chicago, Maya found herself thrust into the role of an advocate. Reporters bombarded her with interview requests, and advocacy groups reached out, asking her to speak at rallies and panel discussions. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the constant attention was overwhelming. But after talking to her father, she decided to embrace the opportunity. Richard Johnson, Maya's dad, played a crucial role in guiding her through this unexpected turn of events. A shrewd businessman with decades of experience navigating controversy, Richard understood the power of storytelling. "This isn't just about you anymore," he told her one evening over dinner. "It's about sending a message, to law enforcement, to corporations, to everyone who thinks they can get away with treating people unfairly." Inspired by her father's words, Maya began crafting her narrative. She focused on 3 key points: the prevalence of racial profiling, the need for systemic reform, and the importance of holding individuals accountable for their actions. Her speeches resonated deeply with audiences, earning praise from civil rights organizations and industry leaders alike. But not everyone supported Maya's efforts. Critics accused her of exploiting the situation for attention, while some defended Greg, claiming he was simply doing his job. One particularly vocal opponent, a conservative talk show host, labeled Maya a privileged diva using her father's wealth to punish a hardworking cop. The comment stung, but Maya refused to let them derail her mission. As the days passed, pressure mounted on both sides. Skyline Airlines faced backlash from certain quarters, with critics accusing the company of overreacting and prioritizing image over fairness. Meanwhile, supporters rallied behind Maya, organizing protests outside police headquarters and flooding social media with messages of solidarity. Greg, meanwhile, struggled to cope with the mounting criticism. Each headline, each angry tweet, chipped away at his self-esteem. Nights became sleepless as he replayed the incident in his mind, wondering where things had gone wrong. Had he really been so blind to his own biases? Was he truly the villain? Everyone claimed he was. In an effort to salvage his reputation, Greg issued a public apology. Standing before a small group of reporters, he read from a prepared statement, his hands trembling as he held the paper. "I deeply regret my actions. During the recent incident at the airport," he began, his voice shaky, "I allowed my personal frustrations to cloud my judgment, and I failed to treat Ms. Johnson with the respect and professionalism she deserved. For that, I am truly sorry." The apology received mixed reactions. Some viewed it as a genuine attempt at redemption, while others dismissed it as damage control. Maya, however, chose not to respond publicly. Instead, she focused on her work, channeling her energy into creating meaningful change. One of her first initiatives involved partnering with a nonprofit organization dedicated to combating racial profiling. Together, they launched a campaign aimed at educating law enforcement officers on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity. Training sessions were organized, featuring speakers from diverse backgrounds who shared their experiences of discrimination and offered practical solutions for fostering inclusivity. The campaign gained traction quickly, attracting support from influential figures across various industries. Celebrities tweeted endorsements, corporations pledged funding, and grassroots activists mobilized to spread awareness. Slowly but surely, Maya's vision began to take shape. Yet despite the progress, challenges remained. Resistance came from unexpected places, including within law enforcement itself. Some officers resisted the training programs, arguing that they were unnecessary or ineffective. Others resented being labeled as racists, insisting that most cops were simply trying to do their jobs. Maya encountered these obstacles head-on, refusing to back down. She knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but she believed in the power of persistence. Every setback was an opportunity to learn, adapt, and grow stronger. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of Maya's advocacy became undeniable. Airports nationwide began revising their security protocols, implementing measures to ensure equal treatment for all passengers. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at addressing racial profiling, citing Maya's story as inspiration. And, perhaps most importantly, countless individuals found courage in her example, speaking out against injustice in their own communities. For Greg, the road to redemption proved longer and harder. His suspension was extended indefinitely, and his future in law enforcement hung in the balance. Yet amidst the chaos, he began to reflect on his life choices. Conversations with a therapist helped him confront his biases and understand the harm he had caused, not just to Maya, but to many others throughout his career. Though the journey was far from over, both Maya and Greg found themselves at crossroads. For Maya, it was a chance to redefine her purpose and amplify her impact. For Greg, it was an opportunity to rebuild trust in himself, in his profession, and in society at large. Neither path would be easy, but both held the promise of growth, healing, and transformation. As the sun set on another day, Maya looked out her hotel window, watching the city lights twinkle below. She thought about everything she had endured, the insults, the stares, the doubts, and smiled faintly. It hadn't been easy, but she had risen above it all, and deep down she knew that her fight was far from finished. The weeks following the incident were a whirlwind for everyone involved. For Maya, life became a balancing act between her professional responsibilities and her newfound role as an advocate. Each day brought new challenges, interviews to give, speeches to deliver, meetings to attend, but she tackled them with unwavering determination. Her message was clear: systemic change starts with accountability, and no one should be above scrutiny, not even those in positions of authority. Greg, on the other hand, faced a different kind of storm. The public apology he had issued did little to quell the outrage directed at him. Social media remained ablaze with criticism, and news outlets continued to dissect his actions. Every time he logged onto his phone, he braced himself for another wave of vitriol. Comments ranged from harsh insults to outright threats, leaving him feeling isolated and powerless. To make matters worse, Greg's suspension turned into an indefinite leave of absence. His colleagues avoided him like the plague, fearing guilt by association. Even his closest friends stopped returning his calls. At home, his wife grew increasingly frustrated with his mood swings and inability to move forward. "You need to fix this," she told him one evening, slamming a newspaper on the kitchen counter. The headline read, "Officers' Racist Behavior Sparks National Outcry." Greg stared at the article, his chest tightening. He wanted to scream, to tell someone, anyone, that he wasn't a bad person. But deep down, he knew the truth. His actions had consequences, and now he had to face them. Amidst the chaos, Skyline Airlines took decisive steps to address the issue. In addition to reviewing its partnership with local law enforcement, the company launched an internal investigation into racial profiling within its operations. Employees underwent mandatory diversity training sessions, led by experts who emphasized empathy, cultural awareness, and de-escalation techniques. Richard Johnson himself attended several workshops, setting an example for others to follow. Maya played a pivotal role in shaping these initiatives. She collaborated closely with HR teams, legal advisors, and advocacy groups to create policies that prioritized fairness and inclusivity. One of her proudest achievements was the establishment of a passenger hotline, a confidential line where travelers could report incidents of discrimination without fear of retaliation. Within days of its launch, the hotline received dozens of calls, highlighting just how widespread the problem truly was. But Maya's work extended beyond corporate reforms. She also focused on grassroots efforts, partnering with community organizations to educate young people about their rights and empower them to speak up against injustice. Schools invited her to speak at assemblies, where she shared her story and encouraged students to stand firm in the face of adversity. Her words resonated deeply, particularly among minority youth who saw themselves reflected in her struggles. Despite her successes, Maya encountered resistance along the way. Some critics accused her of being divisive, claiming her advocacy only widened the gap between law enforcement and the communities they served. Others dismissed her efforts as performative activism, arguing that real change required more than speeches and hashtags. Maya listened to these criticisms carefully, using them as fuel to refine her approach and prove her detractors wrong. For Greg, redemption seemed like a distant dream. Suspended from duty and ostracized by his peers, he struggled to find purpose. Days blurred together as he oscillated between anger and despair. Yet amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope emerged when his captain called him into the office one afternoon. Captain Lewis sat behind his desk, his expression unreadable. "We've decided to send you to mandatory diversity training," he said bluntly, sliding a folder across the table. "It's non-negotiable. If you want any chance of getting your badge back, you'll attend every session and take it seriously." Greg hesitated, unsure of what to say. Part of him resented being forced into something he didn't ask for, but another part recognized that this might be his only lifeline. Reluctantly, he nodded. "I'll do it," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The training sessions proved to be eye-opening, though not always comfortable. Facilitators challenged participants to confront their biases head-on, sharing stories of discrimination and discussing ways to foster inclusivity. Speakers included former police officers turned activists, victims of racial profiling, and psychologists specializing in implicit bias. Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of the harm caused by prejudice, forcing Greg to reevaluate his own beliefs. One speaker, a retired detective named Marcus Reed, left a lasting impression on Greg. Marcus recounted his own experiences as a black officer navigating a predominantly white department. He spoke candidly about the microaggressions he endured, the double standards he faced, and the toll it took on his mental health. "I joined the force because I wanted to protect people," Marcus explained, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "But sometimes, the biggest threat comes from within our own ranks." As Greg listened, he felt a lump form in his throat. For the first time, he saw himself through someone else's eyes, not as a hard-working cop doing his job, but as a flawed human being capable of inflicting pain. Tears welled up in his eyes, though he quickly wiped them away, embarrassed to show vulnerability in front of his peers. Outside the training room, the world continued to spin. Maya's advocacy gained momentum, inspiring others to join the fight against racial profiling. Protesters gathered outside courthouses, demanding justice not just for Maya, but for countless others who had suffered silently. Celebrities amplified her message, sharing videos and posts that reached millions. Corporations pledged donations to anti-discrimination initiatives, eager to align themselves with social progress. Yet amid the victories, moments of doubt crept in. Late at night, After long days of strategizing and campaigning, Maya often found herself questioning whether her efforts were enough. Was she making a real difference, or merely scratching the surface of a much deeper problem? These thoughts haunted her, but she refused to let them consume her. Instead, she leaned on her support system, her father, her friends, and the countless strangers who sent her messages of encouragement. Back at the precinct, Greg began to see glimpses of light at the end of the tunnel. Though his journey toward redemption was far from over, he started taking small steps forward. He reached out to old colleagues, apologizing for past behavior and vowing to do better. He volunteered at community events, hoping to rebuild trust with the very people he had once alienated. And most importantly, he committed to educating himself, reading books and watching documentaries that shed light on systemic racism. By the time the final training session concluded, Greg felt a sense of clarity he hadn't experienced in months. He still had a long road ahead, but for the first time he believed he could walk it. As he shook hands with Marcus Reed after the presentation, he managed a genuine smile. "Thank you," he said softly. "I needed to hear all of this." Marcus nodded, patting him on the shoulder. "Just remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress." As the sun set on another day, both Maya and Greg found themselves reflecting on their journeys. Maya stood on a stage, addressing a packed auditorium of supporters. Her voice rang out strong and steady, urging listeners to keep fighting for justice. Greg sat alone in his apartment, staring at a blank notebook. Slowly, he picked up a pen and began writing. His thoughts, his regrets, his hopes for the future. Though their paths diverged, they shared a common goal: to create a world where respect and equality prevailed. Neither journey would be easy, but both were determined to persevere. After all, true change rarely happens overnight. It takes courage, resilience, and an unshakable belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow. Months had passed since the incident at the airport, and life for both Maya and Greg had transformed in ways neither could have predicted. For Maya, the spotlight that once felt suffocating had become a source of strength. She was no longer just a victim of racial profiling. She was a symbol of resilience, determination, and hope. Her advocacy work had grown exponentially, earning her recognition from civil rights organizations and invitations to speak at prestigious events worldwide. Yet, despite her growing influence, Maya remained grounded, always reminding herself why she started this journey in the first place. Greg, on the other hand, was still grappling with the aftermath of his actions. The mandatory diversity training sessions had opened his eyes to uncomfortable truths about himself and the system he represented. But understanding those truths was only the beginning. Putting them into practice was another challenge entirely. Each day felt like walking a tightrope, balancing his desire to change with the weight of public judgment hanging over him. Maya's growing influence. One crisp autumn morning, Maya found herself standing backstage at a large conference hall preparing to deliver a keynote speech titled, "Breaking Barriers, Building a Future Without Prejudice." The event was hosted by a coalition of advocacy groups dedicated to ending racial discrimination in all its forms. As she adjusted the microphone clipped to her blazer, Maya glanced out at the audience filling the room. Faces of every race, age, and background stared back at her, their expressions eager yet expectant. When Maya stepped onto the stage, applause erupted. She smiled warmly, taking a moment to absorb the energy before beginning her speech. "When I stood at that security checkpoint months ago," she said, her voice steady and clear, "I never imagined my story would resonate with so many people. But here we are, not because of me, but because of you. Because of the countless individuals who refused to stay silent in the face of injustice." Her words struck a chord. Audience members nodded in agreement, some wiping away tears as she recounted her experience. Maya didn't shy away from discussing the pain and humiliation she'd endured, but she also emphasized the importance of turning adversity into action. "This fight isn't just mine, it's ours," she declared. "Together we can dismantle systems built on bias and replace them with ones rooted in fairness and humanity." After the speech, Maya was approached by dozens of attendees wanting to share their own stories or thank her for inspiring them. Among them was a young black woman named Tanya, who worked as a flight attendant for Skyline Airlines. Tanya hugged Maya tightly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "You've given me the courage to speak up," Tanya whispered. "Thank you." Moments like these reminded Maya why she continued pushing forward, even when the road ahead seemed daunting. But she also knew that systemic change required more than speeches and social media campaigns. It demanded policy reform, accountability, and sustained effort. Greg's struggle for redemption. While Maya thrived in her role as an advocate, Greg wrestled with feelings of shame and inadequacy. Though he had completed the diversity training program, old habits died hard. At community events where he volunteered, whispers followed him wherever he went. Some people openly avoided him, while others confronted him directly, accusing him of insincerity. One evening, after helping serve meals at a local shelter, Greg approached a man named Jamal, a former convict turned mentor for at-risk youth. Jamal had been critical of Greg during previous encounters, often dismissing his attempts at reconciliation. But tonight, something was different. As Greg handed Jamal a tray of food, Jamal paused, studying him closely. "You're still showing up," Jamal observed, his tone neutral. "Why?" Greg hesitated, unsure how to respond. Finally, he admitted, "Because I messed up. Big time. And I want to make things right, not just for me, but for everyone I hurt along the way." Jamal raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Actions speak louder than words, Officer Parker. You think serving soup once a month erases what happened?" "No," Greg replied quickly. "It doesn't. But it's a start. I know I can't undo the past, but maybe I can help build a better future." To Greg's surprise, Jamal chuckled softly. "All right then. Show me you mean it. Stick around long enough to prove you're not just here for redemption points." From that moment on, Greg committed to being present, not just physically but emotionally. He attended workshops led by activists, listened intently to personal testimonies, and engaged in difficult conversations about privilege and power. Slowly, relationships began to mend. While trust wouldn't come overnight, Greg's persistence earned him a second chance with some members of the community. Public perception and pushback. Despite progress on both fronts, resistance persisted. Critics argued that Maya's efforts were performative, accusing her of leveraging her father's wealth and connections to gain attention. Others claimed Greg's attempts at redemption were too little, too late. Online trolls targeted both of them relentlessly, flooding comment sections with hateful messages and conspiracy theories. For Maya, the negativity sometimes weighed heavily. Late one night, after scrolling through yet another barrage of insults, she called her father. "Dad," she said quietly, "do you ever wonder if it's worth it? All this fighting? Does it really matter?" Richard sighed, his voice filled with wisdom born from years of navigating controversy. "Of course it matters, sweetheart. Change is messy and it takes time. But every step you take inspires someone else to join the fight. That's how movements grow." His words reassured her, reminding her that setbacks were part of the process. Still, Maya couldn't ignore the toll it took on her mental health. To cope, she leaned on therapy, journaling, and spending quality time with loved ones. These practices helped her maintain balance amidst the chaos. Greg faced similar challenges. Though he tried to focus on self-improvement, guilt lingered like a shadow. During quiet moments, he replayed the incident at the airport, imagining how differently things might have gone if he'd chosen kindness over suspicion. These reflections fueled his resolve to do better, but they also served as painful reminders of his mistakes. A glimmer of hope. As winter approached, signs of progress began to emerge. Skyline Airlines announced a groundbreaking partnership with civil rights organizations to implement nationwide reforms in airport security protocols. Inspired by Maya's advocacy, the initiative included stricter guidelines for officer conduct, increased accountability measures, and ongoing diversity training for employees. News outlets praised the move, highlighting it as a model for other industries to follow. Meanwhile, Greg received news that brought tears to his eyes. His suspension was lifted, pending completion of a probationary period. Captain Lewis delivered the message personally, emphasizing the importance of proving himself worthy of wearing the badge again. "This is your last shot, Parker," Lewis warned. "Don't screw it up." Though grateful for the opportunity, Greg understood the magnitude of the responsibility placed upon him. He vowed to approach his job with humility and empathy, determined to be part of the solution rather than the problem. Looking ahead, by year's end, Maya and Greg found themselves reflecting on how far they'd come and how much farther they still had to go. Maya stood on another stage, addressing a crowd gathered to celebrate achievements in racial equity. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Activists, policymakers, and everyday citizens joined her, united by a shared vision of justice. Greg sat among the audience, watching silently as Maya spoke. Her words resonated deeply, urging listeners to continue pushing for change despite obstacles. When she concluded, thunderous applause filled the room. For the first time in months, Greg allowed himself to feel hopeful, not just for himself, but for society as a whole. Both Maya and Greg recognized that their journeys weren't linear. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and battles yet to be fought. But together, with countless others, they were planting seeds of transformation. And though the harvest might take years to materialize, the act of sowing itself was a victory worth celebrating. The final chapter of Maya and Greg's intertwined stories began on a cold January morning, months after the incident at the airport. The world had changed in subtle yet significant ways since that day. Conversations about racial profiling and systemic discrimination were no longer confined to niche circles. They had entered mainstream discourse thanks in large part to Maya's relentless advocacy. And while Greg's path to redemption remained fraught with challenges, his willingness to confront his biases offered a glimmer of hope for others struggling to unlearn prejudice. Maya's legacy takes shape. Maya stood at the podium, inside a sprawling convention center, addressing an audience of thousands gathered for the annual Diversity and Equity Summit. Her presence commanded respect, not just because of her achievements, but because of the authenticity she brought to every word she spoke. This time, however, her speech was different. Instead of focusing solely on the injustices she'd faced, she highlighted the progress made and the work still ahead. "When I first started speaking out," Maya began, her voice steady and warm, "I didn't know if anyone would listen. But you did. You listened, you acted, and together we've sparked real change." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "Skyline Airlines has implemented new protocols to ensure fair treatment of all passengers. Law enforcement agencies across the country are adopting anti-bias training programs. Advocacy groups are stronger than ever, united by a shared goal of creating a more inclusive society." As she listed these accomplishments, Maya couldn't help but feel proud, not of herself, but of the collective effort behind them. It wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to everyone who had joined the fight against injustice. From grassroots activists to corporate leaders, people from all walks of life had contributed to this movement. After her speech, Maya mingled with attendees, exchanging ideas and hearing their stories. One young man named Jamal, a college student studying criminal justice, approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Johnson," he said, holding out a notebook, "can I ask you something?" Maya smiled warmly. "Of course." Jamal hesitated before asking, "Do you think one person can really make a difference? Sometimes it feels like the problems are too big." Maya placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression thoughtful. "It's true, the problems are huge. But here's the thing. When one person speaks up, others follow. Change starts small with conversations like this one. So yes, I believe one person can make a difference as long as they keep going even when it gets hard." Jamal nodded, visibly moved. As he walked away, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her journey wasn't over, but she knew she was planting seeds that would grow into something greater than herself. Greg's second chance. For Greg, the road to redemption was anything but smooth. Though he had been reinstated as an officer, his return to duty came with strict conditions. He was assigned to community outreach programs, tasked with rebuilding trust between law enforcement and marginalized communities. At first, many residents were skeptical, refusing to engage with him. But Greg persisted, showing up consistently and humbly listening to their concerns. One evening, during a neighborhood meeting, Greg found himself face-to-face with Marcus Reed, the retired detective, who had spoken at his diversity training sessions. Marcus raised an eyebrow upon seeing him. "What are you doing here?" he asked bluntly. "I'm trying to do better," Greg replied honestly. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to earn it." Marcus studied him for a moment before nodding. "All right then. Let's see what you're made of." Over time. Greg's sincerity began to win people over. He attended block parties, volunteered at local schools, and participated in panel discussions about police reform. His efforts weren't always appreciated. Some accused him of seeking redemption for selfish reasons, but he refused to give up. Slowly, relationships improved, and trust began to rebuild. One pivotal moment occurred when Greg intervened during a tense situation involving a black teenager stopped by another officer. Recognizing the potential for escalation, Greg stepped in de-escalating the encounter and ensuring the teen was treated fairly. Later, the boy's mother thanked Greg tearfully, calling him a guardian angel. That moment solidified Greg's resolve to continue using his position for good. A shared moment of reflection. Several weeks later, Maya returned to the same airport where her ordeal had begun. This time, however, she wasn't there. As a victim, she was the keynote speaker at a conference on racial equity in transportation. As she walked through the terminal, memories of that fateful day flooded back. Yet instead of anger or sadness, she felt a quiet sense of triumph. During her presentation, Maya recounted her story, emphasizing the importance of accountability and compassion. Her message resonated deeply with the audience, earning a standing ovation. Among those clapping was Greg, seated inconspicuously near the back of the room. After the event ended, he approached her cautiously, unsure of how she would react. "Maya," he said softly, extending a hand. "I owe you an apology." Maya studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded and shook his hand. "Apologies are important," she said evenly, "but actions matter more. What will you do differently moving forward?" Greg swallowed hard, his voice trembling slightly. "I'll keep learning, keep listening, and I'll do everything I can to prevent what happened to you from happening to anyone else." Though their interaction was brief, it marked a turning point for both individuals and the broader community. For Maya, it reinforced the power of forgiveness and dialogue. For Greg, it served as a reminder of the responsibility he carried as an officer. The ripple effect. In the months that followed, Maya and Greg continued working toward their respective goals. Maya expanded her advocacy efforts globally, partnering with international organizations to combat racial profiling in airports worldwide. Her father, Richard Johnson, supported her initiatives wholeheartedly, using his influence to amplify her message. Greg, meanwhile, became a vocal advocate for police reform within his department. He led workshops on implicit bias, mentored younger officers, and collaborated with community leaders to create safer, more equitable neighborhoods. Though he still faced criticism, he embraced it as an opportunity to grow. Their journeys inspired countless others to take action. Teachers incorporated Maya's story into lesson plans, encouraging students to stand up against injustice. Activists cited Greg's transformation as proof that change is possible, even for those who have caused harm. A message of hope. As the year drew to a close, Maya reflected on how far she had come. Sitting in her apartment, she flipped through a scrapbook filled with letters, photos, and mementos from her advocacy work. Each item represented a step forward, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. On the last page, she wrote a simple note. Change begins with courage. Courage to speak up, to listen, to learn, and to act. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Across town, Greg sat at his kitchen table, penning a letter to his future self. In it, he acknowledged his past mistakes and outlined his commitment to becoming a better version of himself. Signing off, he added one final sentence. Progress isn't perfect, but it's worth fighting for. Both Maya and Greg understood that the fight for justice was far from over. Systemic racism, prejudice, and inequality wouldn't disappear overnight. But they also knew that every small victory brought society closer to a brighter future. Their stories served as reminders that even in the darkest moments, hope could light the way, and that true transformation required patience, persistence, and partnership. As snow blanketed the city outside, Maya and Greg prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They may have started as adversaries, but they ended as symbols of resilience and growth. Together, with countless others, they were paving the way for a world defined not by division, but by unity. And in that shared vision they found strength, purpose, and hope.